Darren Nolan didn't think he just moved. He lunged forward the second he saw the man yank the woman's purse, his daughter's small hand still gripped tightly in his own. "Stay here, Sophie," he said quickly, crouching to her eye level behind the park bench. "Don't move, okay? Daddy will be right back." Before the 6-year-old could answer, Darren was already sprinting across the quiet downtown sidewalk, where a woman in a sharp navy coat struggled against a man trying to rip her handbag away. People passed by. Some slowed down. No one helped, except him. "Hey," Darren shouted, voice rough with adrenaline as he grabbed the mugger's shoulder and yanked him back. The guy swung a fist, but Darren ducked. He wasn't strong, but he was fast. Years of working construction had taught him how to move, how to fight when needed. The man cursed and ran, disappearing around the corner. The woman was breathing hard, one heel snapped, her lipstick smudged from where her cheek had hit the wall. "Are you okay?" Darren asked, his chest heaving. "Did he hurt you?" She blinked at him, stunned. "No." "I thank you." He glanced over his shoulder, checking on Sophie, who waved from behind the bench. "I have to get back to my daughter," he said quickly, not noticing the designer label on her coat or the diamond-studded watch on her wrist. "I'm just glad you're safe." She could barely get out a "wait" before he jogged away. He didn't look back. The woman was still thinking about him hours later. Verena Hale wasn't used to being ignored, not as the CEO of Hale Tech, not as a woman used to commanding boardrooms and breaking records. But the man hadn't even asked her name. He just saved her. No cameras, no agenda, she couldn't stop replaying the moment. The way his first instinct had been to protect, the way he'd gone back to his daughter like nothing heroic had just happened. By the time her driver pulled up to the Hale Tech Tower downtown, she'd already made a decision. "I want to find that man," she said aloud, tapping her fingers against the leather seat. Her assistant Janelle turned from the passenger seat. "What man?" Verena stared out the window. "The one who saved me." Darren didn't think about the woman again. He couldn't afford to. He had bigger worries. His daughter's school fees were behind again, and the plumbing job he was supposed to have that week had been canceled without notice. He worked 4 jobs, sometimes 5, to keep the lights on in their tiny 2-bedroom off 9th Street. He kissed Sophie's forehead that night as she curled up beside him on the lumpy second-hand couch. "One day, baby," he whispered, brushing her bangs from her face. "I'll give you everything, just a little longer." "His name is Darren Nolan," Janelle said 3 days later, handing Verena a file. "Lives in the East Side District. Single dad. Works odd jobs, construction, deliveries, handyman stuff. No criminal record. His daughter's name is Sophie." Verena's heart squeezed at the photo paperclip to the top. Darren, holding hands with a little girl in a yellow raincoat, both of them laughing as they crossed the street. This wasn't just about gratitude anymore. She wanted to know him. It wasn't hard to find his building. What was hard was figuring out how to approach him without scaring him off. So Verena did something she never did. She improvised. She found him working at a local hardware store that afternoon, hauling bags of fertilizer onto a truck. "Darren Nolan," she said, walking up to him, dressed down in jeans and a hoodie, her hair tied in a low ponytail. He turned, frowning slightly. His eyes were tired but alert. "Yeah, I'm Verena," she said quickly. "You saved me last week. That guy who tried to rob me downtown, that was me." He blinked. "Oh, right, you okay?" She smiled. "I am now. I've been trying to find you." He looked confused. "Why?" "I didn't do anything. You helped me when no one else did," she said gently. "And I wanted to say thank you, properly." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't have to, I want to," she interrupted. "Let me take you and your daughter to dinner, my treat." He hesitated. "I don't go to fancy places," she grinned. "Neither do I, not on Thursdays." They ended up at a cozy Italian place 2 blocks from his apartment. Sophie was shy at first, clinging to her dad's sleeve, but after a few breadsticks and a cup of lemonade, she warmed up. "You're really pretty," Sophie said, peering up at Verena. "Sophie," Darren muttered, embarrassed, but Verena laughed. "Thank you. You're pretty too." Darren watched them quietly, a soft look on his face. He couldn't remember the last time someone paid for his meal without expecting something in return, or the last time Sophie smiled this much. When Verena offered to drive them home, he declined. "We're close. Besides, I like walking with her." She watched them disappear down the sidewalk, his hand holding Sophie's, and she knew this wasn't the last time she wanted to see them. They started meeting once a week, sometimes at the park, sometimes for breakfast at the diner on 5th. Verena never told him who she really was, not yet. She didn't want to scare him off. She became just Verena, the woman he'd saved, the woman who liked pancakes and had a laugh that made Sophie giggle. "You're different," Darren said one morning as they watched Sophie chase pigeons. "Most people I meet look through me. You don't," she looked at him, heart thudding. "Maybe you just make it hard to look away." He stared at her, caught off guard. His pulse jumped in his neck. "Verena, do you think," she said, voice quieter now, "we could do this more often?" He swallowed. "You mean, keep seeing each other?" She nodded. He looked down. "I don't have much to offer. I'm just trying to make it through the month most days." "I don't care about money," she said, and meant it. He hesitated. "Then yeah, I'd like that." And just like that, something began. Something slow but real, but nothing stayed hidden forever. It happened 2 weeks later. Sophie had left her homework in Verena's car, and Darren went to pick it up from her office. She buzzed him in, distracted by a meeting, and forgot to warn him. He stepped off the elevator and stopped cold. Her name was on the wall in 15-inch gold letters. Halitech Innovations CEO. Verena Hale. Everything inside him froze. She found him standing in the lobby, holding the homework folder like it weighed 100 pounds. "You lied," he said, voice low. "I didn't lie," she said gently. "I just didn't tell you yet." "You're the CEO of Hale Tech," he asked, eyes flashing. "You've been playing poor with me this whole time." "No, I wasn't playing anything. I just wanted to know you without all this getting in the way." He took a step back. "So what was I, a project, a charity case?" "No," she said, eyes stinging. "You were the only person who saw me as a person, not a CEO, not a headline, just me." He shook his head. "I can't do this." Darren, but he was already gone, and this time he didn't look back. Darren didn't go to work the next day. He called in sick, though he wasn't. Not in the way his boss would understand. He couldn't face people. Couldn't face the way his chest burned every time he thought about her standing in that sleek glass office, her name in gold, her assistant calling her Miss Hale. The sterile stillness of wealth so far removed from his world it may as well have been made of moonlight. He sat on the worn balcony outside his apartment, the paint flaking beneath his elbows as he watched Sophie draw chalk suns on the concrete. Her laugh rose in the air, light and oblivious to the way his hands clenched into fists. She hadn't lied, not exactly. But she hadn't trusted him either. And if there was one thing Darren had learned the hard way, it was that people like her didn't keep people like him around for long. He hated how much he missed her anyway. 2 days passed. Then 3. On the 4th morning, a knock came. He opened the door slowly, already prepared to tell another delivery guy they had the wrong apartment. But it wasn't a stranger, it was her. She wasn't in a designer coat or obscured by bodyguards. She wore a soft gray sweater, jeans that had probably cost more than his rent, and sneakers that looked like they'd never touched dirt. She held something in her hands, a small box wrapped in brown paper, nothing flashy. "Hi," Verena said, her voice steadier than he expected. He didn't move. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she continued, "but I need you to hear me out." Darren stepped aside, wordless, not because forgiveness came easily, but because Sophie had already rushed to the door. Verena knelt. "I brought something for you," she said to Sophie, handing her the box. "Is it a toy?" Sophie asked, wide-eyed. "No," Verena said, smiling gently. "It's something I thought your dad would like." Sophie peeled back the paper with the carefulness of a child used to making things last. Inside was a battered paperback, The Old Man and the Sea. Darren blinked. "I saw it in your apartment once," Verena said softly. "Next to the TV, it had a broken spine like you'd read it more than once." He stared at the book. "I lost that copy years ago. I found one at an old shop near the pier," she said. "Not the same, but close." He looked at her then, really looked. Her eyes weren't polished or proud, they were tired, honest. "I didn't want you to feel tricked," she said, standing now. "I wanted a chance to be known for who I was, not what I ran." "I've never had that before." "You should have told me," he said, the words gravel in his throat. "You should have trusted me to handle the truth." "I was afraid," she admitted, "because the closer I got to you, the more real everything felt. I didn't want to ruin it." He stepped back inside, the door still open. "Come in, just for a minute," she followed, her gaze sweeping the small apartment. It was clean but worn. A map of the world hung unevenly over the couch. Sophie's drawings lined the fridge. A pot of something simple and hearty simmered on the stove. He gestured toward the table and they sat with a space between them. "I didn't grow up with much," he said after a while, "and after Sophie's mom left, it got harder. I've spent years trying to keep things together with duct tape and cheap labor. I don't belong in your world." She leaned forward. "Who says it has to be one world or the other?" Darren looked away. "People like you don't end up with people like me." "No," she said, her voice firmer now. "People like me don't end up with people like you because we don't deserve to, not unless we're willing to earn it." He met her eyes, then really met them. She didn't flinch. That night, he didn't ask her to stay, but he didn't ask her to leave either. Verena didn't press. She gave Sophie a goodbye hug, promised her another book soon, and stepped out into the cool air without looking back. The door clicked shut behind her, but something had shifted. The next time they met, it wasn't accidental. Darren showed up at the park again, not because Sophie begged him, but because he wanted to see if Verena would be there. She was sitting cross-legged on the grass, feeding birds from a small paper bag. He sat beside her without a word, and she didn't ask for one. Eventually, he said, "You ever get tired of pretending you're not important?" She laughed under her breath. "You ever get tired of pretending you don't matter?" They sat in silence for a moment. "I don't want to be someone you visit," he said. "I want to be someone you build with. But I need to know you're not going to walk away when it gets messy." "I'm not afraid of messy," she said. "I'm afraid of missing something real because I was too busy hiding behind my own walls." He turned to face her. "Then let's stop hiding." And just like that, the weight began to lift. They didn't fall into each other overnight. They moved carefully, balancing schedules, navigating Sophie's routines, learning the rhythms of each other's lives. Verena came over for dinner sometimes, helping Sophie with her spelling while Darren cooked. Other nights, they'd meet at a hole-in-the-wall diner that had become their unofficial halfway point. One Thursday evening, Verena took him to a jazz club tucked behind an old bookstore. He wore the nicest shirt he owned, and she didn't blink when he fumbled with the buttons. "I've never heard live jazz before," he admitted as the lights dimmed. "You'll love it," she said, resting her hand on his knee beneath the table. He did, but the world outside didn't stay quiet. 3 weeks after they'd begun to rebuild, her name made headlines again, this time attached to a new merger Hale Tech was finalizing. A reporter snapped a photo of her leaving Darren's apartment building. By morning, the tabloids were spinning stories. CEO's mystery man, who's the poor dad holding Hale's heart. Darren saw the article while waiting for a paint order at the work site. His stomach turned as he read the words speculative, mocking, invasive. By the time he made it back to the apartment, Verena was already there, pacing his living room with her phone glued to her ear. "Yes, Paul, I've seen it," she said sharply. "No, I don't care how it makes me look." She hung up when she saw him. "They're going after Sophie too," he said quietly, holding out a page someone had slipped under their door. A printout of an article with photos of Sophie at the park, her school name barely blurred. Verena's face paled. "I'll fix this." "How?" Darren asked. "You can't unring the bell. I can protect her," she said. "I can get security, change routes. I don't want that for her," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't want her world turning into cameras and whispers." Verena's eyes filled. "Then tell me what you want." He stepped closer. "I want you, but I don't want to lose the quiet life I've fought to build just to have you. I can't trade Sophie's peace for love, no matter how much I feel for you." Her breath caught. "You feel it too," he nodded. "Every second you're near me." She stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "Then let me find a way to keep both. Even if it means stepping back from Hale Tech," he asked. Verena looked up at him, and for the first time in her life she considered it. Verena stood at the edge of the rooftop garden. The city sprawled beneath her like a kingdom she no longer wanted to rule alone. Strings of soft yellow lights glowed overhead, casting a golden haze over the carefully arranged tables and white rose centerpieces. A string quartet played quietly near the far railing, and the hum of conversation drifted around her. Board members, executives, and industry leaders sipped champagne and discussed market forecasts. oblivious to the storm in her chest. She was hosting the annual Hale Tech Benefit Gala, an event she'd once orchestrated with ruthless precision. But this time, she didn't care about the press coverage or the handshakes. She kept glancing toward the elevator, hoping for a miracle, but Darren wasn't coming. He hadn't answered her last call. She hadn't pushed after that. She knew what he was risking just by having her in his life. The headlines had gotten worse. A rival tech blog had published a photo of Darren's building, followed by a smug editorial questioning her judgment as a leader for fraternizing with a man who lives below the poverty line. She had tried to bury it, had pulled every legal string to remove the article, but the damage was done. And Darren had gone quiet. "You're distracted," Janelle said, appearing beside her with a glass of water. "That's your third untouched drink." "I'm fine," Verena murmured. "You're not," Janelle replied. "And I know why." Verena turned to her. "I can't ask him to carry this." "Maybe you're not asking the right thing," Janelle said. "Maybe he doesn't want to be protected. Maybe he wants to be chosen." Verena stared at her for a long moment before setting the glass down. She didn't stay to give a speech. She didn't stay for the toast. She walked out of the gala in a floor-length black gown, heels in one hand, phone in the other, heart racing faster with every step. She didn't know what she'd say when she got there. She only knew she had to try. Darren was on the roof of his building, sitting on a folding chair beside a chipped planter box full of overgrown herbs. The city lights flickered in the distance, but his gaze was fixed on the sky. Sophie had fallen asleep hours ago, curled on the couch with a stuffed bear Verena had once brought her from a bookstore downtown. He wasn't expecting anything. Not a call, not an apology, not a miracle in silk and bare feet. But then the door creaked open. He turned. Verena stepped into the moonlight, her dress trailing slightly behind her, her shoulders bare and trembling. She looked like a person who had walked away from a throne. "You shouldn't be here," he said, standing slowly. "I couldn't stay there," she replied, voice tight. "Not if it meant losing this." He didn't speak. She stepped closer. "I don't want a life that makes sense on paper. I want one that feels real. I want one with you in it." "You think wanting it is enough?" he asked, the words quiet but heavy. "You think loving someone fixes everything?" "No," she said, "but I think not loving someone out of fear is worse." He looked away. "I'm not scared of loving you. I'm scared of what it takes from Sophie." She didn't ask for cameras or articles or people judging her because her dad's not a billionaire. Verena's voice broke. "I never wanted to take anything from her. I wanted to give her everything I never had: stability, safety, someone who shows up." Darren's jaw tightened. She stepped even closer, now just inches from him. "Do you know how many people I deal with who only see me as a name on a headline? And then you came along. You didn't care about any of it. You cared about whether I was okay, whether your daughter was happy. You made me want to be someone better, not someone richer." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. "I've been thinking," she said, softer now, "about what matters, about what I've built, and I realized I built it all without anyone to share it with. I don't want to keep doing that." He met her gaze. "What are you saying?" "I'm stepping down." The words fell like a stone into still water. "I've already started the paperwork," she continued. "I'll be appointing a new CEO at the end of the quarter. I'll stay on the board, but I'm done living in glass towers with no one beside me." Darren stared at her, stunned. "You'd give it all up." "I'm not giving it up," she said. "I'm trading it in for you, for Sophie. For a life that feels like mine, not one that looks good in magazines." He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he stepped forward and took her hand. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "That's why I did." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since they'd met, there was nothing between them. No secrets, no fears, just the weight of something real settling between heartbeats. She stayed that night, curled on his couch beside him, her forehead resting against his shoulder. He read to Sophie when she woke briefly from a dream, and Verena watched him with tears in her eyes. The next morning, she made pancakes in his kitchen while he fixed the broken faucet without needing to ask for help. It was quiet, uncomplicated, perfect. Over the next few weeks, changes came swiftly. The press lost interest once she stopped feeding them. New stories replaced old ones. Verena's final press conference as CEO was brief and clear. She spoke about fulfillment, about balance, about choosing what mattered most. She didn't mention Darren by name, but she didn't need to. He was waiting outside the building when she stepped down for the last time, holding a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in newspaper. She laughed when she saw him, dropped her designer clutch on the sidewalk, and ran into his arms with the kind of abandon that couldn't be faked. They moved in together 2 months later, not into her penthouse, into a small house on the edge of the city with a yard big enough for Sophie to run in and a kitchen they painted together on a Saturday afternoon. She kept a room filled with books. He built shelves for them by hand. They fought sometimes, about groceries, about bedtime routines, about whether to get a dog or a cat, but they never fought about love, because that had never been in question, not since the day a man with calloused hands and a steady heart stepped into a fight he didn't have to join. And found the one woman who saw the world in him. They didn't live a fairy tale, they lived something better, something real. The sun filtered through the kitchen window of their modest house on the edge of the city, casting golden stripes across the tiled floor. Verena stood barefoot at the counter, carefully slicing strawberries into a bowl while Sophie, now obsessed with making her own fancy breakfasts, arranged tiny pancakes into a smiley face on her plate. Darren leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching the pair with a quiet contentment he never thought he'd know. "You're cutting those too thin," Sophie announced, glancing up at Verena with all the authority of a 6-year-old culinary expert. "I'm following orders," Verena replied, handing her the bowl. "Chef Sophie, your strawberries." Sophie beamed and got to work decorating her plate. Darren stepped forward and kissed Verena's temple. "I didn't think I'd ever see mornings like this." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Me neither." It had been almost a year since Verena had stepped away from Hale Tech. The transition had been messy lawyers, board votes, media speculation, but she'd weathered all of it with a kind of calm she never had before. She'd taken time off, real time, and learned how to let her phone stay silent for hours, even days. She'd traded 8-figure deals for Saturday morning crafts, late-night card games, and long walks without a destination. She hadn't just stepped down. She'd stepped into something. That afternoon, while Sophie was at her friend's house for a birthday party, Darren and Verena walked quietly through a local street fair. The scent of kettle corn and grilled sausages filled the air. Booths lined the sidewalks, selling everything from handmade soaps to abstract paintings to second-hand books. A local jazz band played in the square, the same tune that had once echoed through the club where Verena had taken Darren for his first live performance. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. It was only when they passed a booth selling old typewriters that Darren stopped. He picked up a small, rusted Royal model, its keys worn but intact. "My dad used to have one like this," he said, running a thumb along the spacebar. "He'd bring it out when he drank too much." Said the old stories got louder when the whiskey kicked in. Verena tilted her head. "Did he ever write anything?" "Nothing coherent," he said with a dry laugh. "But I liked the sound of it, the clack of keys, felt like something was being made. They bought it. Not because they needed it, but because they wanted a piece of something that had once mattered." That night, Darren surprised her. When Verena walked into the living room after putting Sophie to bed, she found him hunched over the typewriter, his broad hands carefully pressing each key. A single sheet of cream paper sat half-filled in the machine. He looked up when he heard her steps. "I've been writing something," he said. "Started a few days ago." "What is it?" she asked, sitting beside him. He pulled the page from the machine and handed it to her. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't fiction. It was a letter to her. Every word was simple, plain, no flourishes, just truth. He wrote about the first time he saw her, how she looked frightened but stood her ground. How he didn't expect her to chase him down for dinner, let alone change his life. How he hadn't known it yet, but from that moment, something had shifted in him. He wrote about Sophie's laughter when Verena read to her, about how she made their house feel bigger without adding a single square foot. He wrote about fear, the fear of not being enough, of being left behind, but also about the stubborn way she kept showing up, even when he tried to push her away. And then he wrote the words that made her breath catch. "I don't want to just live life beside you, Verena. I want to build one with you." Every squeaky door, every bedtime story, every crowded grocery run. I want all of it. For as long as you'll have me." She looked up, tears stinging her eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled something small and velvet, a ring. It was simple, elegant. A single diamond set in a platinum band. Not flashy, but timeless. "I didn't buy it yesterday," he said quietly. "It's been in my drawer for weeks. I was waiting for the right moment, and then I realized maybe there's no perfect moment, just the right person." She didn't speak. She just nodded once, fiercely, and threw her arms around him. They got married 2 months later, in a garden behind a local community center where Sophie and her classmates had planted sunflowers. It wasn't a grand affair. There were no helicopters, no press. Just close friends, a few neighbors, and a quiet joy that pulsed through every moment of the day. Darren wore a navy suit, the same one Verena had helped him pick out months ago for a job interview he never went to because they'd ended up adopting a stray dog that day instead. Verena wore a white dress with short sleeves and pockets, her hair pinned back with tiny silver leaves. Sophie stood between them as their flower girl, grinning with a gap in her front teeth and petals clutched in her hands like treasure. After the ceremony, they didn't fly to an island or disappear into a luxury villa. They stayed in town. They spent their first week as husband and wife repainting the spare room, turning it into a reading nook for Sophie. The mornings were filled with pancakes and music. The nights with movies and the quiet comfort of a home no longer built on fear. One weekend, while browsing at a bookstore, Verena found a flyer for a local nonprofit looking for volunteers to help teach business skills to small-town women. She took it home, pinned it to the fridge, and stared at it for 2 days before making the call. It became her new passion. Helping women with ideas but no resources unlock the kind of doors she once walked through alone. She didn't go back to running companies, but she helped others build theirs. Quietly, fiercely, with purpose, Darren, meanwhile, started writing more, not for publication, not for praise, just because he'd discovered a voice he didn't know he had. He wrote letters to Sophie for when she was older. He wrote about the weight of choices and the relief of second chances. Sometimes he'd read them to Verena when they sat on the back steps at dusk, their dog curled at their feet, the sky melting into lavender and gold. They never had a perfect life. They had car trouble. They had bills. They had disagreements about chores and screen time and what counted as a healthy snack. But they never stopped choosing each other, not once. And every now and then, when Verena would catch Darren looking at her across the dinner table or brushing Sophie's hair from her eyes before bed, she'd remember the day he stepped in front of danger without hesitation, not knowing who she was, not expecting anything in return. The day a man with nothing gave everything, and in doing so, found everything he'd ever need. The first major storm of autumn rolled in the same night Darren's first article was published. Rain pelted the windows in waves, and thunder rumbled low over the rooftops as Verena curled up on the couch wearing a worn hoodie of Darren's and reading the printed magazine in her hands. The piece was tucked between a story on local artists and an op-ed about housing reform. It wasn't flashy. It didn't even have a photo, but the headline alone made her heart beat differently. Ordinary men, extraordinary moments, why we still need heroes who don't wear capes. She read it again, slower this time. Darren had written about that day in the city park, but not as a moment of heroism. He wrote about instinct, about fear, about the strange responsibility of being seen as something larger than what you are. He wrote about Sophie. About how every act of bravery was really just a choice to love someone enough to step forward instead of back. It wasn't about her. Not directly, but she felt every word in her bones. When Darren came in from locking up the shed, rain dripping from his sleeves, she held up the magazine without saying anything. He gave her a crooked, sheepish smile and rubbed the back of his neck. "You weren't supposed to see that until morning. You wrote about us," she said, voice thick. "I wrote about you," he replied, sitting beside her, "and her, mostly about how I got lucky." "You didn't get lucky," she said, curling into his side. "You just showed up." They didn't need to say more. The storm outside did the talking for them, and the silence between them was warm. The magazine article didn't go viral. It wasn't meant to. but it did catch the attention of a local teacher who reached out to ask if Darren would come speak to his high school students about writing from the heart. Darren said no at first. "I'm not a teacher," he told Verena one evening as they folded laundry, socks, and school uniforms piled between them. "You're someone with something to say," she replied, matching 2 socks and handing them over. "That's usually more important," he went, and then he went again. Soon, he was volunteering twice a week at the community center, helping teenagers craft essays and college applications, using the typewriter only at home but carrying the same honesty into every conversation. One afternoon, he came home with a drawing one of the students had made of him and Sophie stick figures under a crooked tree with the caption, "Real heroes look like dads." He stuck it on the fridge next to a pizza coupon and a spelling test. Verena, meanwhile, had begun mentoring a group of young women trying to launch small businesses. She never talked about her past role at Hale Tech. She let them lead, let them fail, let them try again. She donated time, not money, unless it was needed, and always anonymously. One of the women, a seamstress from the South Side, had started her own alterations shop after Verena helped her secure a micro-loan. She insisted on making Verena a dress as thanks. It was a red, tea-length dress with a wide neckline and a hand-stitched hem that made Verena gasp when she first tried it on. "You look like a woman who knows exactly who she is," Darren whispered when he saw her wearing it one evening. She kissed him before answering. Not everything was smooth. They had to navigate new rhythms, Verena learning how to live without constant structure, Darren adjusting to being asked for advice as if he were some kind of expert. Sophie struggled with math one semester, and they both took turns staying up with her, turning fractions into kitchen measurements and equations into bedtime stories. But no part of it ever made them question what they'd built. One crisp December morning, Verena walked into the kitchen with a folded envelope in her hand. Darren was flipping pancakes, humming under his breath, while Sophie set the table with mismatched plates. "I got a letter today," Verena said, sliding it across the counter. Darren wiped his hands and opened it. It was from the Hale Tech Board. They wanted her to consider rejoining as a senior advisor, not a return to full leadership, but a guiding voice during a major transition. She could work remotely on her terms. They'd understood, finally, that she didn't need to be at the helm to still shape the future. "Do you want to?" Darren asked, handing the letter back. "I thought I would," she said. "But now, I'd rather help people who actually need it. I don't miss the title." "I miss the impact." "Then make it somewhere new," he said. "You're not done building things, you've just changed what you're building." She smiled, leaned up, and kissed him. "I love you." "I love you more," he said, and Sophie groaned behind them, covering her eyes. "Gross," she giggled. "Now can we eat?" They did. And it was perfect. That spring, they hosted a block party, not a gala, not a charity event, just a neighborhood gathering with folding tables, sparklers, and lemon bars. People brought lawn chairs and casseroles. Kids ran barefoot in the street. Darren set up a projector and played old black and white movies on the side of the house after sunset. Verena sat on the grass beside him, her head on his shoulder, her red dress brushing the tops of her knees. "You ever think about how different things could have been if you hadn't stopped that guy in the park?" she asked him softly. He looked down at her. "I think about how I almost didn't. I was tired, distracted. I had Sophie with me. I almost stayed on the bench." "But you didn't," she said. "No," he replied, "because something told me to move, and I'm glad I did." She reached for his hand and laced their fingers together. "I used to think love had to look a certain way," she said. "Big entrances, grand gestures, perfect timing, but now I know it's showing up every day. Even when it's hard. And pancakes," he added, she laughed. "Especially pancakes. Their life wasn't the kind people wrote headlines about anymore, but it was the kind people stayed for years past." Sophie grew taller, bolder. She started writing her own stories, some of them based on the people she knew. One, called "The Girl Who Had Two Homes in One," made Verena cry for 3 days straight. Darren published more essays, always under his own name now. He was never interested in fame, just in truth. Verena eventually opened a local center, a hybrid of everything she'd learned: business mentorship, childcare, creative workshops. She called it the Hale House. not after herself, but after what she believed every woman deserved a place to grow roots without being asked to apologize for them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Darren surprised her with tickets to the jazz club where she'd once taken him. The club had changed owners, but the band still played. They danced slowly, surrounded by strangers, and Verena leaned in close. "You know," she murmured, "I still remember what you said that night." "Which part?" "That you didn't belong in my world." He smiled, his hand resting at the small of her back. "You proved me wrong." "No," she whispered. "You proved yourself wrong." Outside, the rain started to fall. But inside, the music played on. And the life they'd built imperfect, earned, and endlessly full held them steady in its quiet, powerful rhythm.